Welcome to this explainer brought to you by Forge College. Today, we're putting on our lead engineer hats to architect a seriously secure, high-tech multi-sig bank vault. Keeping digital assets safe? It's not just about slapping a lock on a door. It's about designing a smart system that knows exactly who's allowed inside, what they can do, and how to instantly shut the whole thing down if something looks sketchy. So let's jump right in and move from theory to actual implementation. Here's our game plan for Janae. We're going from audits to action, assigning the wallet roles, wiring up the emergency stop button, stress testing our defenses, and finally documenting the fixes.
All right, part 1, from audits to action.
So we're starting with kind of a messy desk here, a giant pile of audit red flags pointing out misconfigured hierarchies and exposed pause functions. Now, you've already practiced turning those discrete findings into concrete fixes. But now, it's time to synthesize them into a unified, deployable smart contract. We aren't just slapping band-aids on random lines of code here. We're mapping every single vulnerability to a specific code-level guard, and we're writing unit tests that will explicitly fail if that guard ever gets removed.
Moving on to part 2, assigning the wallet roles. To lay the absolute foundation of our vault, we need to figure out who our strict bouncers are going to be. That brings us to role-based access control, or RBAC. This is basically the gatekeeper logic ensuring only explicitly authorized accounts can perform sensitive operations. Instead of relying on a single, all-powerful owner account, RBAC enforces the principle of least privilege. Think about it. If a user only needs to pause the contract, we absolutely under no circumstances give them the keys to execute transactions.
And here you can see exactly how we map 3 specific roles to their exact privileges. The admin role, that's our top-tier configuration gate handling recovery. Then we have the pauser role, which is incredibly narrow. It literally only exists to hit the emergency stop button, nothing else. And finally, the executor role is the only one permitted to actually push through multisig-approved transactions. So, why does this matter? Well, by completely avoiding that raw overarching owner logic, we ensure that if a pauser key gets stolen, the attacker can only free the contract. They can't drain the funds. This is what we call reducing the blast radius. In cybersecurity, you basically have to assume a breach is going to happen eventually. If a hacker gets their hands on the pauser key, yeah, it's a headache. The system halts. But your funds? Totally safe. If we had used a single owner key for the whole shebang, that exact same hack would mean a totally drained vault. Separation of privilege really is your ultimate safety net.
Which brings us to part 3, the emergency stop button.
Okay, we've got our roles defined, but what actually happens when the pauser needs to do their job? I mean, what happens when a hack is detected in real time? If you don't have an emergency stop, watching a hack unfold is basically like being locked out of your own bank while the alarm blares. You can see the money leaving, but you're completely powerless to stop it. A well-designed circuit breaker changes pausing from a frantic scramble into a clean, predictable control path.
Notice this deterministic sequence of events. The moment the emergency button is hit, we immediately halt the execution flows. But, and this is key, we deliberately leave the lights on. An event is emitted to record the actor's address, and all state-changing operations are completely frozen. Not a single drop of money moves. Crucially, though, your read-only functions still work perfectly, so you can safely assess the state of your vault without unpausing.
Now keep this in mind. Leaving a pause function callable by anyone is like putting the bank vault's lock on the outside. The unpause function must be strictly guarded by the admin role. Otherwise, a malicious actor could just restart your vulnerable contract right after you stopped it. No way we want that. If unpausing is too easy, your emergency stop is entirely useless. A hacker could just write a script to continuously unpause the contract faster than your legitimate pauser can stop it. This is exactly why we split those pauser and admin roles up in the first place. Recovery absolutely has to be governed by a completely different, highly secure policy.
All right, part 4, stress testing the defenses. Building the vault is really only half the battle. Now we have to throw everything we've got at it. We've got the happy path where an authorized executor pushes a transaction perfectly. But true security? That's about what happens when things go wrong. We have to explicitly write negative tests, where an attacker tries to pause the contract, asserting that the transaction reverts with an access control error. Let's be real. If you don't test your failures, you just have assumptions, not security. To speed up this whole process and hit your acceptance criteria, you can actually use vibe coding. You just hand an AI assistant a prompt exactly like this one to refactor the hardhat test suite. Writing all that boilerplate test setup for different roles can be a massive drag. By giving AI this precise instruction, you instantly get a robust, ready-to-go starting suite of test fixtures. You run them, see what fails, Ask the AI to tweak the assertions and just iterate. It's a real game changer because it lets you focus on the actual security logic and edge cases instead of typing out endless setup code.
And hey, you also have to stress test all the weird stuff. We're talking about simulating double pauses, simulating double unpauses, checking role revocations, and tracing actor addresses in omitted events. What happens if two different pausers hit the panic button at the exact same millisecond? Or what if someone tries to unpause a contract that's already running? Your testing suite has to guarantee there are no unexpected revert sequences when panic sets in. Because in a real emergency, people absolutely panic, and systems get flooded with duplicate commands. Your contract needs to handle all that human noise predictably and safely.
Finally, let's look at Part 5, documenting the fixes. Testing is fantastic, obviously, but in a professional Web3 environment, you actually have to prove your work to external reviewers. You can't just fix the code and walk away. Your audit-resolution document is the essential proof. It's basically the receipt for your security work. It's a short, verifiable record that points directly to your specific code comments and tests, transforming vague fixes into concrete engineering. Like, if the initial audit checklist said that a pause is actionable by an untrusted account, your resolution document needs to point straight to the lines of code, proving that unauthorized users are officially blocked.
Now let's see how this all integrates together. By keeping the security module separate from the messy business of multisig voting, we've created a really clean, reusable component. You'll want to export these exact test fixtures for your role-assigned accounts, list out the function signatures, and integrate these hooks into your Capstone multisig architecture. This ensures you're bringing that airtight, deterministic emergency behavior directly into your next big deployment.
We've built an absolutely incredible security layer today. Roles are restricted, emergencies are handled cleanly, and everything is backed by rigorous tests. But here is the thing. A vault still needs a bank built around it. So if your multisig module can seamlessly survive an emergency stop and enforce strict role access, how will you design the overarching architecture to govern it? That is the big challenge for your Capstone project. Be sure to check out forge.college to master that next step in your Web3 journey. Thanks so much for tuning into this explainer, and we will catch you in the next one.